Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. My guest today is MOG Machine. Hello, MOG. How you doing?
Good morning. Good morning. Very good.
Good morning for you. You're in Dubai, right? So you're
in Dubai this week. Yes.
Yes. So MOG was very kind to roll out of bed and the first thing do this podcast. So very appreciative. So MOG, we did a hash rate last week that got like a giant number of views. And I've really only had my head stuck into this thing for maybe 4 weeks or so now. The biggest question that I have after sort of going through it all, it's building a network which validates and rewards great AI, right? It's this reward and transfer value system for great AI, and it uses something called Yuma consensus to test out the AI and to come to agreements between different validators on whether one of the miners is producing great AI. And I think a lot of people are still very unclear, including me, on exactly how that happens. I mean, because it would seem to be subjective, right? Like what is the test for great AI and how do we know that it works as we think it does?
Okay, well, the first thing I'm going to correct you on, which is quite interesting, because the origins of obviously the Bittensor Network and what everyone associates to it is AI and only AI. However, since the launch of Subnets and the general sort of agnostic nature of Yuma consensus, I often, when I describe, especially at the beginning of my Urbit talk, the network, I say it's an incentivized, decentralized commodities market rather than artificial intelligence network or intelligence network. And at the moment, we're in a kind of a weird balance between we wanted to showcase all of the potential of subnets and what could be done, and that it could be used to generate and validate any form of digital commodity for which the architecture of distributed compute was suited to. So things like storage, compute itself, Subnet 27, storage, Subnet 21. And so it was important to try and get subnet builders to understand that there was more than just inference from language models, from image models, pre-training and training going on. However, what we're now doing is almost bringing, in some ways, a focus back to the intelligence, to the machine intelligence, because I feel should we say the stalwarts of the Bittensor Network don't want it to, or want to make sure that AI still is this primary focus. So in terms of how do we validate the intelligence or the commodities produced, and how does Yuma consensus work? I look at it this way, and I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you line up 100 university professors in a room, and they are your miners, your models. Mm-hmm. And you have a series of taxing questions that you ask them. You go through, there's you have yourself and me, we're validators. We have a list of questions. We have a slightly different rank importance, you and I. I've got slightly higher importance because more people in the ecosystem have put their weight delegation behind me. Nonetheless, we still have the right to both go and ask them a list of questions, and we ask them a list of questions, and they answer those questions, and we individually note down our responses. We score them. We say, okay, it's good, very good, not so good. We give them scores, essentially from 0 to 1, and then we come together. It's not just us. There's a couple of other validators here in the room with the same clipboards, and we all come together and we hand in our notes to Yuma. And what Yuma does is they look at everybody's scores.
Yeah.
They produce a normalized mean average. However, there is a slight weighting. They say, hey, the community have said that MOG, we're putting more weight behind him. So his responses carry a little bit more weight than Mark's, who hasn't quite built up that community support at this point, defined by delegation.
Right.
This is why the amount of stake you have as a validator is very critical. They're all put together, and then a single set of scores is defined. Quite simple.
But before we go on to any more of this, who comes up with the criteria? Who comes up with the list of questions, right? And who comes up with how it, what the answer key should kind of look like, right? That would seem to be very subjective and human oriented. So how do you do that?
Right. But so you understand the Yuma part. It then gives those scores back, and there are the scores, and we go ahead and we repeat that process. What that process is, the questions on the clipboard, and how we defined how we went to those individuals and asked those questions, that is subnet specific. That's subnet design. And for every subnet, that's different. And that's what can make and break a successful subnet. That's when you hear about subnets being gamed or exploited or not working efficiently. It's due to the validation process and the rewards mechanism. And it can be different on every single subnet. So
which party actually comes up with the test, though, for a specific subnet?
The subnet creator. The person who writes the subnet code will define what makes, for instance, I could come up with my we're going to keep it simple for now. When I ask the miners, university professors questions, it's more important to me how fast they answer. So I'm going to give them a higher score based on speed criteria versus accuracy. Whereas for you, you've decided when you design your subnet, it's more about accuracy, and you're going to give a higher score if they give the same response as another professor, because then you're seeing a conference in responses, and you think, oh, similarity. You guys think the same. If the majority start to think the same, I'm going to reward that similarity. That's subnet 18. Or we're going to go back to the origins of subnet 1. You could say, oh, you've given a different response to the others. Your subnet, your response has a higher value because it's diverse. So it's up to you, and again, whether you mark speed, length, and I'm only talking in a simplistic, easy to understand questions that we've asked. Of course, if you're judging an image, you're using other models on the validator to judge similarity within the image cosine itself, the similarities of the image defined by code, and other metrics where you can define quality, again, speed of response. If you were looking at disk space, so subnet 21, that should be an easy one to define. I'm going to score higher those who are providing the most disk space consistently over a long period of time, because I'm building a storage subnet. The thing that's the most important is the volume of disk space that you're providing to the subnet, the speed at which we can access that disk space, and the consistency with which it's all online. There's no point in building a storage subnet with a huge storage from a miner, very, very quick responses, but it goes down for a couple of hours a day and it's not available. So they actually have this very, very interesting system on Subnet 21 where you build up a ranking over time. It's like a levels, it's like loyalty levels. Start on bronze, move up to silver, gold, platinum, and it takes a while to build up your reputation as a service provider within that subnet.
Okay, so all these subnets, and just to review for those who don't know, at the moment there are 32 total subnets. Down the road there'll be 64, 128. However many number of subnets this thing can grow to. I assume it's effectively infinite in the number that can come online. But each one of these is like its own little universe, and has its own set of actually very subjective tests, because the subnet operator is the one who defines the test criteria. So there is some human, decision making that goes into in the Bitcoin network. There is no human decision making, right? Like it's all very machine oriented. This has some humans sort of defining criteria and coming up with the correct answers, the answer key. So that's to that extent, it's a little bit subjective and humanish. And and all these subnets are very different. Many of them are AI, but they don't have to be AI. You have one that's sort of like your own version of render. You have another one that's your own version of Filecoin. And it can, any sort of thing that people can come up with can be a subnet. So, and that is a little bit confusing, I think, because I thought Bittensor was primarily AI, and I guess it still is primarily AI, but it in the end, 5 years from now, we don't know that AI will still be the main focus. It could be one or more of these other things that sort of take over. So in 5 years, if this thing is successful, what do you think it looks like? What is your vision of a successful Bittensor in 5 years?
Well, I think the other question that would be difficult to answer is where do we see the overall AI landscape and industry in 5 years' time? Will we have achieved AGI? Will it have become an integral part of our everyday lives? On what level will AI have changed from the current focus of consumer AI and commercial AI, how businesses are integrating AI? And it's kind of like one of those conversations where if we were sitting here 5 years ago saying, where do we see blockchain? I believe the advancement of AI will move much faster than blockchain has. With all due respect to blockchain, it has changed a lot of industries under the hood, and we can see this rolling change, but it hasn't fundamentally changed society, perhaps in the way that if we were sitting here 5 years ago on a podcast, we may have been, instilling in people that it will. But AI is changing I think the way that so many businesses operate at scale. And I see if, in the bullish case, as Bittensor evolves, is that it provides an alternative access point to whatever is the market demand for AI technology. At the moment, so much of the demand, public demand, is for chat and image. That's what people can understand that. So if you're building consumer products at the moment, you're building variations on chat and image mostly.
I think what's kind of confusing for a lot of people with Bittensor, it was for me in the beginning, was like, where's the front door, right? I hear it says Bitcoin like ChatGPT thing. I know where to go for ChatGPT, right? To find the command line, openai.com. But Bittensor, where's the front door? There's many front doors.
Door is Corell. Without meaning to,
no, without a doubt. And for those who don't know,
answer the question though, and the original question. So that's the consumer usage of it, but that's a requirement. But the industry requirement, the artificial intelligence open source community at the moment, what they're demanding is which goes back to the origins of why Jacob et al. Created the network, which is training how to train new models to achieve standards comparable or superseding the centralized offerings from likes of OpenAI and Google and Meta, and that's really where the focus is, because at the moment everyone wants to produce these better and better models, smaller models we can deploy on smaller devices, generalized models, specific models. So we're still in this technology rush to make better and more functional, generalized and specific models, whilst at the same time trying to work out what else we can do. So that's really where the call of Bittensor is at the moment, is understanding what we can do, which is the same, which I would say mirrors the industry, but we're constantly trying to provide opportunity that potentially you don't have within the centralized world. We can sit there and wait for OpenAI to ship new products, new functionality, or you've got companies such as Deux, who are producing these incredibly strong models that are comparable or outperforming OpenAI models and Google and Meta models. So it's
is Deux on Bittensor, or is that
Deux is now on Subnet 6. Let's see if I'm the best person to comment on the technicalities of it. So the new fine-tuning subnet, which is Subnet 6. As far as I see it working, it uses synthetic data developed or generated by Subnet 18, which leverages, as you said, arbitrages centralized API keys. So it taps into using existing centralized models for synthetic data training, and then rewards the miners, only the top subset of miners, for having the least loss on the model fine-tuning, which I'm not an AI/ML engineer, so to explain that I'll leave it at that in terms of the value. For adding value to fine-tune the model, and so it's continuing to debate. It's being used for fine-tuning, which was one of the initial objectives, pre-training fine-tuning of the Bittensor network. So to improve the models so that they can produce better models, which then can be deployed on Bittensor.
So one of the things that people ask me about when they find out that I'm looking into Bittensor is, and I'm not an AI guy, so I'm not the expert on this. So even though I'm an engineer by training and a blockchain guy, I know all that stuff very well, but this I don't know as well. But it would still seem to me that the centralized entities, AI favors the very large and very centralized because they have the giant compute power and the data sets to produce the best AIs. Right? Like, I think that's true. And if that's true, then if Bittensor is this ragtag fugitive fleet of all these little tiny AIs kind of competing in aggregate, how does Bittensor win against ChatGPT and Google and Microsoft?
Well, Hugging Face would tell you that that's not true, and that the open source models are often as good, if not better, on many of the benchmark tests. Thing is, for you and I who are not ML engineers, who are not going onto Hugging Face and deploying our own models, running our own GPUs, what ChatGPT has is a product that you go and use, you understand how to use it. And when you type a question, hey, I've got this bit of code, can you modify it for me? They don't just query one model. They have a workflow set up. It's not just like in, out. If you're doing a code question on GPT, internally within OpenAI, they're creating that code, sending it to another subset model. You can say, oh, that's code. Check that again. And then they say, no, make sure he did okay and optimize this code. They're doing a whole bunch of processes and workflows behind the scene to produce a strong consumer experience for you. And that's why we see the centralized as being better. Does Spotify provide you a better music selection than a more diverse music selection than if you actually went into record shops? I'm showing my age here. Into record shops to find records? No, you would find more, but it provides you an easier to digest and an easier to use interface, and you just you become. So you flow down the guardrails of that centralized experience because it provides everything you need. It's easy. I click, I've got it. So I'll take what's given to me, and I won't go outside of the rails of that because it's easy for me as a consumer.
I think what you're talking about is productization. So these other centralized entities have put a lot of time into productizing the AI. It's not just raw compute, just sort of splatted onto a command line. There's actually a lot of filters and things and niceties. Yeah. They're sort of piled on top of that. Some of them we maybe don't like because maybe it puts a political slant on it that we disagree with, or it censors things that it doesn't want to talk about, right? So Elon talks about, AI being too woke, right? So, depending on where you're coming from, it's either too woke or too conservative or too whatever. And, and we actually want to get to the answer that seems like it is the truth without any sort of slant or productization. So it can be good and it can be bad, right? So I think that brings me to one of my other questions, which is, it's almost like I look at Bittensor now as almost being sort of like an app store. There are 32 apps like on the Bittensor network, right? And down the road, there'll be 64, 128, whatever. And each one of them does something very different. And some of them are quite cool and work very well right now, and others are sort of rough. But they're all mining Tao, and they're all being rewarded for passing the test that was set up by the Subnet definer. But if nobody is using that AI, right, like if it's not actually used by people or companies, the Tao reward model doesn't take that into account, right? Nobody could be using it, and yet they could be collecting Tao. They probably shouldn't really get Tao for not servicing people, right? So do you agree with that? And am I characterizing it correctly?
I don't agree with that they shouldn't get Tao because there's various stages to setting up a subnet. And the first thing you do when you create a subnet is make sure that your incentive mechanism works and that the reward mechanism works, and you're not going to just throw it out to the public for what I would consider to be organic queries until you've made sure they're working for the synthetic validator queries. But I am probably one of the most vocal people in the community to say that after that, you do need a product. Whether you build it or you provide the infrastructure for other people to build product on your subnet, or open your subnet to allow people to access that data. And it's always been something that's been my primary focus, is to bring in real world traffic and essentially for organic queries to outweigh synthetic queries within the network. I've been shouting about this quietly, talking about this since March of last year, when we first started building what was Bittensor AI, which then became Corell. And our focus is to bring in developers to build applications and infrastructure and commercialized products on the network. That's where the true value goes. And it's at the moment we're in a transitionary phase. And I believe that a lot of the criticisms or issues that people find within the network are solved naturally through demand. And so bringing in that demand is one of our primary focuses on Corell. But in order to do that, certain aspects of the network have to be, I wouldn't say improved, but designed so that they are suitable for mass usage. And this is something that we're focusing on very strongly at Corell. We actually have an announcement this week which works hugely towards this, which is something that we will be implementing on Subnet 19. So by the time you publish this, I think I'm not going to say anything now, but hopefully by the time you publish this, the announcement will be out. To help, and this will be open source for all subnet owners to copy, as obviously all subnet code is open source, but to allow this to happen. Because of course we speak about the validators being the gateway to the network, but really the load needs to be shared across all validators in order to achieve this properly. There's no good if one validator is the one, or a very small subset of validators are the ones building and sending all queries through to the network. So all I can say at this stage is those that understand this and really want to build for the network at scale and we're not the only ones doing this. There are others doing this, which is why I'm choosing my words carefully, building for a network where the synthetic data, the validator data set, me going in there with my clipboard, is a backup. I'm expecting to have thousands of public members, hundreds of thousands of public members standing behind me to come in to perform this validation process for me. And if on the very off chance there's none there, I can go in with my clipboard. And what we then expect to happen, sorry, I'm just going to finish, and this is where Dynamic Tao comes into play really in the future, is that emissions for subnets should be governed, or at least heavily influenced by the demand, the public demand for, the public, not say the consumer, but the demand for access to a subnet.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I was going to get to Dynamic Tao because I did see that. So I read up on it a little bit, and it's so first of all, who decides? I guess there's a council that decides who gets to run a subnet, right? They apply. Or they can just add a subnet. Oh, but there's a certain number of slots open. So there's 32 slots open, but you don't, they're full right now. So nobody else can come in at the moment. But at a certain point.
What happens is you can register a subnet once every 24 hours. There can be one subnet registered. And when you register a subnet, the subnet with the least emissions is kicked off. If there are multiple subnets with zero emissions, 0.0000, the one that's been in the longest gets kicked off.
Got it.
It's that simple. The one with the least demand is ejected. And that's produced an interesting dynamic, because at the beginning, obviously, with 32 open slots and not all of them filled, people were registering and we were waiting slowly for 32 to get filled up. Now they were filled up. There was a bunch at the bottom that had 0.00004 because someone somewhere had assigned a tiny bit of emissions to make sure they weren't on the zero. And now we seem to have cycled through the zeros. We had a couple of them re-registering themselves because they weren't quite ready. But we're now at a stage where the reality is, if you want to launch a subnet, you need to plan your launch. No longer do you register your subnet and think, we'll deploy code in a couple of weeks. You now need to have your code ready, tested on testnet. I would highly suggest a marketing plan in order to communicate to both the validators and the community and the world at large as to the value of your subnet, and then demonstrate that very quickly in order to gain emissions, so you don't then lose your slot very, very quickly. And then to answer your following question about who decides the emissions. And this is a problem which Dynamic Tao looks to solve. The current landscape for emissions, who decides what subnets get emissions? The validators. The validators, with their vested interest in the health of the network, are perceived to be in a position of trust and responsibility to be able to get together, and in the same way that we would mark miners and score them, we essentially assign score to the subnets. Each of us individually, we have a total of 100% of emissions, or 1, and we have to divide that up between all of the subnets. And then what happens? Yuma consensus is deployed to normalize and essentially average those weights, we call them, across all subnets, taking into account the prioritization of those with higher stake who are considered to have a more trusted and more valued opinion. The problem being that produces a kind of backdoor politics, to quote Jacob Const, ring-kissing oligarchy, which is where subnet owners are more likely to come and say, hey, can you set me weights? Please set me weights. We had this deal. I'm your friend. Please set me weights. Please set me weights. It's not ideal. And it's not something we like. And there's also, and I'm not going to avoid the subject, because people watching will say, also, subnet owners who have validators, such as ourselves, are obviously incentivized to send more weight, or have if it's an unbiased opinion, that our subnets have more value than maybe other people may think. So it doesn't have a natural market demand-driven deployment of emissions. And that's the problem that it seeks to solve. However, and now this is my personal opinion, not necessarily, what you realize that is until you get the network to a certain level, you actually, I believe, cannot quite decide what is the natural demand for a subnet until you are able to quantify and measure and show that metric and decide it within the network. So that the decision is to, or the essence of Dynamic Tao is that instead of 12 validators, or 12 validators, 20 validators deciding, all participants of the network can decide. But if, say, for instance, and again, this is my opinion, but I believe it to be fact, say 90% of organic network traffic goes through subnet 18 and 19 at the moment, because they're the ones that the consumer products are built on, in the current landscape, that would be, even I would admit, a disproportionate amount of emissions to put to two subnets. But if you were to go with the public opinion, a lot of the public, the retail investors of Bittensor, don't necessarily understand a greater portion of the subnets. So I think this is a reason why at this point we need a little bit of a pause to really research, test all of the mechanisms of Dynamic Tao, so that when we are ready in, I would imagine, a couple of months with what I know, to deploy this and it to work in the way it's intended, and rather than amplifying the issues that we have already, it will be ready, basically.
Yeah, so you said something earlier. I didn't want to interrupt you, but rewinding about 5 minutes or so, you said that the subnets that have the least demand get kicked out. Now, there is no mechanism at the moment for measuring consumer demand. There's just, I assume you meant validator demand.
No,
right?
Subnets with the least emissions, not demand, the least emissions. The emissions set by validators. So the ones that the validators have deemed to have the least value.
Got it. Okay, so still there's this council of 12 or whatever it is that decides.
Although we do talk, there are some groups that the validators do discuss things on. I wouldn't say that they are overall used to reach a consensus. I would say validators set weights based on their own criteria. and some have much more stringent criteria than others. I know the foundation and I are quite open as the top two validators. Well, I mean, I think both of us would happily jump on a call, maybe a private call, because it's not respectful just to, and we engage with the subnet creators to say who we're setting weights to and why and what we believe and why we haven't given other weights. Because I'm often called up on this, and a subnet creator will come to me and say, why have you removed my weights?
Right.
Because you've had, I supported you for your initial deployment. I made sure that you didn't get deregistered. You got your incentive landscape stable, and you haven't done anything. Where is your roadmap? Where is your product? Where are you going with this? Why haven't you communicated? And you haven't done anything to justify. Plus, I've also done the maths. I've worked out what you're actually getting in dollar value per day or per month. I've been present in your community, so I know the size of your team and what you're doing. So I feel you have a fair reward for what it is that you're doing. And so my job as a validator is not just to mark you based on the value that I give to your subnet, but to make sure that the overall reward that you're receiving is just and fair. So to give an example, if someone has 5% emissions, and I've given them 5% emissions, and I think that's fair. But then through the actions of the other validators who think, oh, I'm going to give them 10%, and it goes up, I may remove emissions or reduce emissions to bring it to a level that I think is fair. And I consider that to be our role as validators, is to balance emissions across the network. Of course, if we're
so you're like the gardeners. You're like the gardeners pruning and adding more soil and fertilizer where it needs to go and getting rid of the plants that aren't really growing well.
We're checking code. We're checking teams, communication, the stability, how they interact with the miners, the costs associated with running on the subnets, the reliability, and then the quality of the code and development, and therefore the overall value that's being added to the Bittensor network.
But at the moment, you're not taking into account the amount of traffic that is going to that particular subnet from the consumers,
at this stage,
right?
I would consider that to be front-facing consumer product or industry-relevant product that may not be a front-facing consumer app, but a usage. And that is it is really up to the subnet creators to communicate that. We can do our research, but if you've got an app and you're not saying that you've got 10,000 users when you do, it's not my position to then go and investigate your metrics. I mean, that does work on the other side. There are subnets who are guilty of putting out marketing material on Twitter, showing what their subnets can do, which we then investigate, and actually you can't do that on the subnet. It's it's a potential of what the subnet might do, but this advert has not actually been created with your subnet, should be the disclaimer underneath. And we reflect that in our choices as well.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there should be some mechanism for product market fit evolution, right? Just like startups, if they can't find customers, they die, right? And here you're rewarding what appears to be a good startup, but they may have no product market fit. Like, you know what I'm saying? So that's the one thing I don't like about the model that I've identified so far. I assume probably down the road you guys will address this, but that's sort of.
Well, I feel that validators can take their role. It's up to them to build their role within the community. And so my role as a subnet creator, or subnet creator as part owner of subnets, I feel is to demonstrate how I feel, and we're very much focused on consumer subnets, how they should be operated. So lead by example. But as a validator, I'm sure the small subset of subnet owners would tell you, I'm not always very nice. I'm courteous, but I'm honest.
Yes.
And I feel that it's our job as a validator to instead of just doing nothing and talking about it behind closed doors, is to communicate and nurture subnet creators, but without patting them in cotton wool and saying, look, you need to do better. This is not acceptable. This is not what we're expecting for Bittensor. Good idea. Now continue to execute. And there are validators doing this. I do know this, but not all validators do this.
Yeah. Well, I did find a couple of other front doors that look pretty interesting to me. One of them, Tensorplex Stream. Have you seen this?
I have seen Tensorplex. I had a call with Tensorplex as to some of the things that they are doing. The stream, remind me what the...
So it's pretty cool. So it's really cool. So I like this. This is really cool. It listens to podcasts and summarizes them so you don't have to, and listens to a lot of crypto podcasts. And it actually, somebody uploaded the last edition of hash rate to it, and it did a very good job of analyzing it and summarizing it quite well.
Yeah, it uses a non-Bittensor API to do the transcription part, because there isn't quite a reliable transcription source. And then it uses Subnet 18 to analyze the sentiment of the podcast. Yeah, there's a lot of quite cool little apps being built I've seen at the moment. Some that are doing some market analysis. What was the other one I saw recently that allowed you to kind of build nodes? It was on Twitter. It's for actually accessing the data within the Bittensor network. So you could query, price and performance of subnets, and it was tapping into using Subnet 18 and tapping into TaoStats data. So the network data to allow you to do an analysis. So there are some cool things being built at the moment, definitely.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. The other one that I saw, a thing called Sybil, SYBIL.com, and that appears to be not really like Corell, more like a new kind of Google search, but using the Bittensor network. That's what it looked like to me.
You have Sybil, and you also have Datura, which is Subnet 22, both very, very bright minds within the ecosystem. Caro, who former foundation, and Floppy, Floppy is now Fish, Datura, who also has a very, very strong knowledge of the network and history in the ecosystem. And they're doing, it's very similar. The products have a similar promise, although they'd probably both argue that how it's being done behind it's contrasting and different. But it's tapping into the internet at large, Twitter, Reddit, and all these various different sources, and allowing you to build search with references. I think that was one of the powers behind it. I was using the latest Datura demo the other day, and I was quite impressed by it. The interface was very nice, and you could ask a question and one that you often wouldn't get from GPT. I was like, where do you think the price of Tao is going? And it was going in there saying, well, look, I've gone into Twitter and people are saying this and they're doing this and they're doing that. And so based on these sources, which you can now link to, now I was just testing it, but I'm imagining if I wanted to gauge overall Twitter sentiment, to have this AI that was tapping into Twitter, indexing it, and providing sources as a researcher, I was okay. This is pretty cool. I do like this, and it was one of the few products that finally had a pretty sexy front end. If I'm honest, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and you can feel the difference when you're using a raw AI. That will actually tell you things that, will actually answer the question, unlike Bard or ChatGPT that'll sometimes just go, oh, I'm a large language model, I can't help you with that. And that, beneath the hood there, they've told it, don't answer these kinds of questions.
Well, it depends on your questions. A lot of us like to think, okay, let's find out what the model will say if I ask it. And we know it's a question that if we asked a human, they would say, oh, I'm not going to answer that. There's questions I could ask you now, Mark, on air, and you would say, right, I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to answer that in public. So why are we surprised when a model says, come on, like someone's told me this is, I'm only going to get in trouble if I answer this question.
Right.
So
fair enough. It can cause trouble too. All I'm saying is you can feel the difference, and there's something sort of refreshing about that. I realize that there are some dangers associated with that as well. So there has to be some sort of balance there, but it is interesting. So let's go back to Dynamic Tao for a second, because I want to really just sort of, can you explain what it is in sort of dummy speak? It feels like it's some sort of.
When people ask me about Dynamic Tao, I'll tell you one thing that it is and one thing it isn't. It is a draft. It is a working proposal in draft, and we are currently on the second draft, or the second redraft, and it will continue to evolve. When people sort of say, well, it is this, it's going to be this, it's not going to be anything, it's not fixed. The foundation understood the problem. Before they understood they understood the problem, which I previously.
What is the problem? Let's state the problem, like in dummy speak.
The problem is a situation where 12 individuals, the validators, are responsible for defining the emissions on subnets, rather than it being defined by organic market demand. Quite simply.
Great statement of the problem. Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem. The solution, the initial solution, and the concept of the solution is to provide if we say tokenized, this was what caused the problem. If we say tokenized sub-assets of each subnet, people start screaming and being very concerned that Tao value is being diluted, that there's going to be too many tokens. So tokenized was a dangerous word, was a what's the word?
You didn't want to just issue anher token because then everyone would scream, right?
Intention,
yeah.
But what the foundation, I believe, want to do is to allow subnets to have a value tied to Tao, which balances itself in pools. So let's say I have my subnet, and for now I'm going to use a 1-to-1 ratio because it's going to be easy to understand. I believe what we proposed was a 1-to-32 ratio for subnet tokens to Tao.
Ratio of what?
If you understand about liquidity pools, you'll say, right, here's a subnet.
I see.
And when you launch it, I'm going to stick 100 Tao, which is in a pool, and give you 100 of your subnet tokens, and there you have a balance. The more people that want to swap their Tao to this subnet token, the balance of value of the subnet token to Tao changes. So what happens is you have, essentially you're saying, in order to receive emissions and to support a network, you have to actively register your vote with that network. The more votes that a network has, the higher emissions it will get. If you no longer believe in that network, or you believe another network requires more of your vote because it's being more profitable and providing more value, you would then move your stake, your Tao, your subnet tokens, convert back to Tao and convert them to another network. And of course, you could split across different networks, but the idea would be that the flow follows I'm not going to say the profitability, but the value of subnets and also the demand. So if a subnet was to suddenly come out with some killer application that had a huge demand and was generating a lot of traffic, you could see a sudden flow to that subnet. And then as that demand weaned or another subnet came out with something, this is something Kara spoke about 6 months ago I picked up on, which was this very fluid movement of emissions. So they don't have to be like, okay, that's the value of that subnet, I'm not changing, which is very much where we are at the moment. I change my weights all the time for subnets. I literally, if I see the validation process isn't working for a while and someone else has done something good, move over. I would probably change them at least once every 48 hours. I'm constantly changing my weights. And I think we should be reacting. But I will say that other validators are less hasty in changing their weights. It's more of see it as a grading. So the way it works, what it looks to define is a network flow of Tao to votes, tokens, liquid stake Tao, whatever you want to call it. Subnet tokens, in order to define the demand for a subnet.
Yeah, okay. I like your description of it as liquid stake Tao. That's to define dynamic Tao. That actually makes it clear for people who have been in the DeFi.
I've used the wrong word though, because liquid stake Tao is actually something slightly different. Liquid stake Tao is being able to use staked Tao for liquidity on other chains. So actually that's if I say liquid stake Tao, that's something completely different that is also coming to the network that solves liquidity issues. But I actually used the wrong word. It is dynamic Tao. So before we
got it. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. So basically, these people they stake their Tao to get the dynamic Tao, and then they can I, as just someone who is not a validator, but is just a mere mortal participant in the network, but who has staked their Tao, will I get dynamic Tao to be able to vote with?
So So the initial proposal stated that you, as a retail investor with your 100 Tao, who currently thinks, well, what influence do I have? I stick in on a validator. I hope they do the right thing that I agree with. If they don't do something I agree with, I can move to another validator, but it's not, it's like emailing your congressman. Yeah, you have the right to, but your single email isn't likely to make a huge difference to policy. However, what happens under the new proposal currently is that you will only receive the juicy APR for choosing choosing a subnet. If you do nothing, you will no longer receive APR. You must choose subnet tokens. And if you choose the right subnet or a subnet's value that increases, Once you swap back to Tao, you will actually have more Tao than you started with. So it becomes an active decision.
Got it. You actually just answered a question I was going to ask, because I've seen systems like this before, and most of them die from apathy, right? So, there's a lot of people that want to own tokens, but very few of them want to actually do anything, right? They just want them to sit in their ledger in their sock drawer, right?
Correct.
So,
but the criticisms that immediately came from this were, I don't want to lose my Tao. What do I do if I don't have the knowledge of the network and I'm not prepared to do the research? Is there a simplistic option? Can this be gamed? And so the answers to these are, well, what if I don't want to lose my Tao? Well, you can look at it from any involvement in crypto. If you have someone, and we all have it, friends, family, friends, acquaintances who say, I want to get into crypto, what should I do? And those of us that have been into this for years understand that it's not just to buy something, sit there and watch yourself become a millionaire. If you want to really profit, you need to research, you need to understand, you need to be fluid, you need to be able to change your mind. It's not just and if these people are not prepared to do this and they're lazy, you go, well, buy Bitcoin and wait. That's it, buy Bitcoin. And even then, learn about what it is so you understand when is a good time to buy and when is a good time to sell. If you do nothing, it's not a magic ticket to ride. And I think that's something that Hans felt very strongly about in terms of the days of free APR for sitting on your ass and doing nothing. You need to be contributing to the network, if not technically, at least from understanding where the value is and therefore driving value to those places. So that was the first thing in terms. That said, there will be, once you open something up to essentially a form of liquidity pools, products can be built on top to allow staking baskets. So you'd have a service provider who would say, hey, we'll just follow the flow of emissions. You stake your Tao, or you subscribe to our product, and we'll just follow the flow of emissions. And you won't get the best APR or the best gains, but it's like buying an index fund or
it's like copy trading. It's like copy trading Nancy Pelosi. You're going to probably do pretty well.
Exactly. And then of course what we will sitting there is a subnet owner saying, well, hold on a minute. What about, have you considered that? And I don't want to sit here and outline the things, because the foundation have been amazing at listening to the community. And the most important thing has happened by doing this. A lot of the public have been screaming, crying, well, we don't want this. This is terrible. This is great. This is terrible. That's one thing, to scream out on Twitter your approval or disapproval of it. Another thing is to really sit down and think about it, articulate your concerns, and then communicate with the foundation to say, well, have you thought of this? I'd like you to speak to this expert. And the foundation have been fantastic. They're not sitting there saying, we don't care about what you think. This is what we're going to do anyway. So this is why this is a working proposal in draft that is evolving, because there are, and I believe what's happened is the foundation, from where I believe we currently are, is that the mechanisms are being tested, and currently now on testnet, in closed testnets, the mechanisms are being tested, tried and tested. But at the same time, there's probably a realization that as the landscape and profile of the network changes over the next few months, those mechanisms and how they work will also evolve. And so it needs to be considered, that change needs to be considered and factored into when this is deployed and how it is deployed.
Yeah, the other thing that worries me a little bit about it is the other sort of weakness to systems like this that I've seen in DeFi is that bribes always arise. And in fact, Curve very famously they just said, yeah, it's a bribe-based system. We're going to institutionalize it, and the entire network's decisions are made basically running on bribes. Do you guys have an opinion on that? Do you see that as a problem, or do you see it as a feature? I wasn't going to say bribes, but I would say that in these, my initial concerns was those with large amounts of Tao, subnet creators with large amounts of Tao had an unfair advantage from subnet creators with lower amounts of Tao, which caused interesting dynamics and decision-making opportunities for subnet owners who had smaller amounts of Tao as to what they could do that may not be in the best interest of their subnet or the health of the network in order to kind of game that slightly. I mean, these are weird market dynamics, and you point this out and you say, well, have you thought that, as a small low Tao subnet owner, it might be in my best interests with my knowledge to perform actions X, Y, Z, and then a subsequent set of actions rather than performing the set of actions that
are best for the health of the network and my subnets. I don't want to explain what this idea was, because of course you have if you are being asked to make decisions on the I'm going to say the value of a subnet and the future value of a subnet, those that are creating the subnet and managing and running the subnet have the power to define and govern that. It's up to them to release updates, or to do something terrible to that subnet. And of course, the initial response from the foundation was this is very much reputation based. But there are people that add a lot of value to this space, and the same blockchain, that choose to remain anonymous, and pseudonyms can come and go. And whilst some of us leverage and are very, very concerned with our reputation, there are others who that it's a disposable asset, shall we say, that can be rebought and rebuilt. So these human elements, if it's just code, it's much easier. But when you put in place the humans, everything changes, which has actually been one of the defining hurdles to overcome with the Bittensor network, which has been the human side of it.
Yeah. I can see that. So let's talk about the humans for a second. So you've referenced const a few times, and probably a lot of people are watching this coming from the broader DeFi universe, not necessarily from Bittensor universe. They're not Tao moon boys necessarily, right? Although I'm sure there's some of those too.
Who are these people?
So let's just talk about const. So const reborn is the handle that he goes by. So when you say const, you're talking about that
Jacob
person.
Thieves. And I have the same problem with my wife. My entire life these days revolves around referring to people based on their screen names. Even my developers, and some of us have more memorable screen names. Some of us have screen names that you suddenly realize that it's strange to bring out on around a dinner table. So yeah, obviously we're spending a lot of time on Discord.
What is constant what is it? What does that name mean? Do you know? Constant is he being reincarnated, or like what does it mean?
I think it's not as grandiose as you think. It's not about constants and variables. I'm going to be in trouble for not having paid attention. It's either Constantine or Constant. It's a very basic historical reference that appealed to him at the time, I believe. I think it's something you should ask him.
Got it.
We all have our reasons.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you know what MOG Machine means. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, MOG Machine is very simple. MOG is my initials of my full name, and so it's always something I've used. And MOG Machine was my development agency for 20 years, and it just came from the fact that when I was deciding this, when I was 16 or 17, I needed to have some kind of name to encompass all the activities that I was doing. I was riding toy machine skateboards, and there was a toy machine skateboard up on the wall there. And I was like, looking around. I think all of my handles and passwords and screen names have come from in a very kind of usual suspects type way of looking around.
I was just going to say, it's very Kaiser Soze.
It's very Kaiser Soze.
Off the wall.
And literally, whether it's like there's some passwords in my life that have come from, it's all come from looking up and going, that. And it stuck. So MOG Machine. I'm MOG. It's my machine. So whatever I want with it. And,
that makes sense to me. So how long have you been involved with this, and when did you get involved, and why did you get involved?
I got involved it came on my radar in September 2022, thanks to a Dreadbongo tweet, the unsung hero of my life, because it's not the first time. His alpha has had a profound effect on many aspects of my life. I owe that man more than a drink and a dinner, I would say. But the problem is, when you see a Dreadbongo tweet, it's too late. You can usually see let's say a market effect of the Dreadbongo tweet. But because he'd been teasing about something that he was very, very excited about, it was worth a look. And at that particular time, having, I would say, where the market was then, I was not enthused with the crypto economy. We'd been going through, a lot of people had suffered. It was, if you were checking into crypto every day and sitting there on crypto Twitter, there wasn't a lot of development going on that was being publicized, and it wasn't a very good place for mental health, I would say. And I was a bit bored. I had wound down my development agency at the beginning of the year. I'd had a baby. I'd had enjoying my life in a while, but I was mentally understimulated, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And GPT was coming into prevalence, and I started to look into this Bittensor thing. And I thought, this is interesting. It's interesting because I know nothing about this. I really don't. And I felt like how I felt in 2015, 2014, when I was told about Bitcoin, and I looked at it and thought, I'm a bit too busy to get too into this right now. Decision I would later regret.
You're not the only one.
And I wasn't.
I was in that 2013, so I did well.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to make that decision again. And as a father now with children, and seeing this as a technology that would fundamentally define our society in many aspects, I felt it was very, very important to start to learn about this and understand it, even if just from a hobby sense. But Bittensor's rabbit hole. The other side of it is, as an investor, it was a very, very good opportunity. And seeing the network effect of the Bongo tweet wear off, and understanding the effect a single tweet or a small amount of attention to the network had, understanding the current market cycle, plus the potential of the AI sector and the effect that would have on its crossover to blockchain, it became a little bit of not a no-brainer, but a very strong conviction to move some of my assets over to it. And also I was very much interested in running nodes and validators on different networks, which I had been doing. But this one was like no other. And the moment I started, it's the rest is kind of history. I met some great people who both helped me, motivated me, educated me, made me feel very much part of the community. I think the community was much smaller and a little bit different at that stage. And I was still late to this community. I had to sort of work out who the various people were within the various different circles. But I love data. And as a validator, I started creating data and charts, and I was querying the metagraph, the command line interface version of Bittensor. And I was visualizing that data, putting it into spreadsheets, sharing it in the community. And that only lasted a couple of weeks before I realized I needed to make a website to do this. So I made TaoStats in its initial form, which I was updating manually. And then
you made TaoStats. I actually didn't realize that. I love that site. That's fantastic. Great work. Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, that's how I sort of dug around and started figuring out what was going on. So thank you.
Well, that's what TaoStats was initially for, to enable all of us to assign a value and to be able to keep track of the metrics for the participants within the network, the miners and the validators. What were we doing? Just to be able to quickly go onto a website, see this table, order it by the values that were relevant to us, and add in extra metrics. And as soon as you have that data, you realize you can chart it. You can put in all sorts of data from the chain, and then also provide data that was useful to the communities, the validators, their rankings, whether they're trustworthy, but whether they want to be public, and provide the validators essentially a public page to say, hey, delegate with me. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing. Because most of the validators don't have their own. Their validator is not really a product that's being pushed through a website or anything like that. So TaoStats did this. Obviously, we then went on to create the Explorer because there was a need for the Explorer, and that's something we continue to develop because without an Explorer, you're not going to CoinMarketCap and not going to take you seriously. Exchanges are not going to take you seriously. And so we continue to develop TaoStats now as a resource for all participants in the network, which includes education. And so there's a lot going on with TaoStats. So that's how I got into it. And TaoStats was that entry point. And then later when we moved to Finny and we had...
Finny being the latest release of the blockchain.
Yes,
correct.
I think it was March or April 2023. And suddenly it was possible for anyone to query the network. And we understood that would be the validators would be the gateway to this network and would need to provide API access in order to make that available to developers and consumers. So then we pushed forward with what was BitAPI, which, because that was a bit of a mouthful and people could never quite get it right, has now become Corell, and that's been my journey. So as a service provider from TaoStats, subsequently as a validator under TaoStats, and now as a subnet creator with a participant in the subnet creation through partnerships with Subnet 18 and Subnet 19. So
let me ask. So we're coming up on the hour here, so I don't want to keep you forever, but I've basically two more questions left. The first one, as you were talking about the blockchain, one of the things I never totally got was most everyone else that's doing DePIN things are over on Solana, right? And it would seem like that's the place to be because of the mad throughput of the blockchain in terms of its ability to scale. Why did you guys not just use Solana and encapsulate all this stuff in a token and a smart contract?
Okay. You guys, first of all, I'm not from the foundation. I had no role in the decision making of this, but it was illustrated at the beginning why Substrate was chosen. And there was some of the fundamental choices and architectures of the chain that appealed to Jacob and Alla that made them choose that over another chain. Secondly, there are
Substrate. So just for people who don't know, Substrate is a chain architecture that I think it's Polkadot related, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
on Cosmos. And the ideals of the creator of this architecture that aligned with what Jacob and Alla were doing. There is a possibility to run parachains on Cosmos, which we originally actually had a slot for as Bittensor. But in the end, we didn't do this, and we stayed with our own chain. Or I'm saying our now. The foundation stayed with their own chain as it enabled them the complete flexibility to do what they wanted, which in the way that the chain is set up is actually didn't stifle innovation. And so it was really the right choice to make. As to why, when you talk about throughput, this is one of the misconceptions. Bittensor is multi-layered. Think of it as a sponge cake, where one layer is the blockchain, another is the intelligence layer, and Yuma consensus is the cream in the middle. We are not bound in terms of throughput and capacity by a blockchain. That is the intelligence layer, and that is infinitely scalable, governed by the resources contributed by the participants of the network. So what I mean
the AI doesn't slow down because the chain is.
If you want a better throughput or more power, your miners need to run better GPUs, need to have a better infrastructure setup, need to have higher latency, higher bandwidth. And if you're rewarding those factors, that will your network will organically scale. If you start to, as we discussed at the very beginning of this call, define your reward metrics, and throughput, bandwidth, power are those, then those that provide the least of that will be kicked off, and those that are providing more will be receiving more incentive. So the choice of the blockchain was purely down to the functionality that it afforded the foundation, I believe, and that it aligned with where they wanted to go. And it wasn't required to have a blockchain that had a higher throughput or could scale to so many.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
Yeah,
got it. And then last question. So I've been told that there will come a point in time where, in order to use any of these subnets, you will have to pay in Tao. So that'll be sort of like the gas to access the services. Is that coming? And what do you think about that?
This is my no. You will never have to pay in Tao. The facts that make this that give rise to this are validator emissions are a decreasing commodity due to continued emissions of the network. So the more Tao that come into issuance, the more that this APR is being shared across. The fact that miners will always be prioritized for the health of the network. So currently we have a 50-50 split in emissions between validators and miners. However, if required through proposal and vote by the Senate triumvirate and the participants of the network, we need to further incentivize mining. That could be changed and would go towards the miners. And it was always indicated by Jacob, and it hasn't something that's been talked about, I think, in the last 6 months because there have been way too other dynamics. But validating will eventually no longer yield rewards in a long time in the future, and validators should be moving towards a revenue-based business model. And that's something that we've always been doing, and we understood this early on. Now, I happen to know that doesn't mean all validators will need to be building on the network, but they will need to understand the value of their access through their stake to the network and either monetize it or subscribe to those that are producing product that allows them to monetize this. So if I'm not building a gateway to the network, I need to let someone who is building a gateway to the network have access to the power, to the access that I have. Will you require Tao to use the network? No, never. You require Tao as your gateway access, but a lot of us who are building see it as Tao being this kind of background token that's used in the core communication and the exchange of value in the network itself, but not on what's being built on Bittensor. For instance, when we eventually, Corell is free at the moment. The incentivization of the network allows us to provide free API access, free apps, etc. But there will be revenue-generated models for those that are using them to generate revenue and using it at mass scale. It will massively undercut the centralized entities, but there is a revenue generation model in there. Our initial thoughts is that you would pay for this like you pay with GPT with fiat. You don't pay for your GPT subscription with Bitcoin. If they add that would be cool. And people shouldn't need to have Tao, consumers, public, to use the network.
Do the subnets communicate and ask each other questions? And does that require Tao, or will it require Tao it won't require inside Tao. The network?
It requires innovation, and it is currently happening. There are subnets that are starting to use each other. There's Subnet 26 is currently implementing something in their validation process. So instead of needing to use an external API, they use Subnet 18 in order to provide to facilitate a certain aspect of their rewards of their validation mechanism. Subnet 6 is communicating with 18, and I believe there's an interaction with 9 going on. So yes, this is starting to happen. And Subnet 1 have spoken about this only last week in the TGIF, which is the weekly or bi-weekly update from the foundation on the main Discord, where they see it as becoming almost like a kernel, a set of agents that allows its participants, its miners, to go off and speak to individual subnets to perform the tasks that the user requires. It's quite that's. Let's not get onto that at 1 minute, 1 hour,
no.
And 6 minutes. But I highly recommend.
I think we're done.
If you're interested in that, to go back and listen to last week's TGIF, which I believe will be available on YouTube somewhere.
Okay, we'll wrap this up. MOG Machine, thank you so much for waking up, rolling over, and jumping on camera. You're a brave man, and this subject is absolutely fascinating. You're a great speaker on the topic, so thanks once again. Is there anything you want to plug before we go?
No, I feel like I've done it with. I have multiple personalities, and so there's the part of me that obviously wants to say Corell.io and TaoStats.io, but there's so many other people building on the network, and I would like to plug people to get involved. Get on the Bittensor Discord, get on the community Telegram's community Discord, and get involved, because it's one of these things where you will be rewarded for what you're prepared to put in, whether it's time to educate yourself, your knowledge, if you really can. So that's what I want to plug. I want to plug people getting involved and diving in and not being put off by, if you come from an AIML background, it's a crypto project. It's not a crypto project. There is an incentivization mechanism, but get in there, because it's a really exciting space with a lot of potential.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I can attest to that firsthand after sticking my head in for the last 4 or 5 weeks. All right, that's it. This has been Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. We'll see you all next time.